thank you and our online audience for joining us this evening for Soul Visioning, Clear the Past, Create Your Future with Susan Weishart and David Birr. In consideration of others, will you please turn off any phones, noise-making devices before we get started. I see some new faces here this evening and some regulars. For those of you who are new to the organization, the Theosophical Society has a vision of wholeness that inspires a fellowship united in study, meditation, and service. And it encourages open-minded inquiry into world religions, philosophy, science, and the arts in order to understand the wisdom of the ages, respect the unity of all life, and help people explore spiritual self-transformation. To that end, we offer a variety of lectures, classes, retreats, and workshops, including monthly sound meditations or your gong baths. Please help yourself, pick up a brochure, and check our website for updates and changes, and our online classes. The Society is a membership organization, and you'll find membership information online and at the information table downstairs in the lobby. There are benefits to becoming a member, including library borrowing privileges, along with discounts for classes and programs and workshops, and at the Quest Bookshop, which I know some of you frequent. You'll also receive the Quest magazine 4 times a year and monthly new member letters for 24 months to keep you informed. So this evening, the Theosophical Society is pleased to welcome back to our campus Susan Weishart and David Birr. By day, David is an environmental engineer whose company is dedicated to improving air and water quality and energy efficiency. However, he has facilitated weekly soul groups for 50 years, taught courses and presented lectures on many topics, including intuition, dreams, soul development, forgiveness, esoteric psychology, meditation, astrology, relationships, numerology, the enneagram, healing, reincarnation, and karma. Susan has been in private practice for over 25 years as a holistic psychotherapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and certified hypnotherapist. She is the international author of Soul Visioning, Clear the Past, Create Your Future. She holds a master's degree in psychology and was trained by Dr. Brian Weiss and Dr. Michael Newton in past life regression. She says she likes to travel to Hawaii, which works out because her partner has just returned from his project from his environmental job from Hawaii. So things work out.
Not a bad gig.
Yes. So please help me welcome Susan and David.
So welcome, thank you for coming out on a cold winter night. We appreciate that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I wrote the book Soul Visioning, Clear the Past, Create Your Future. You know, a few years back, there were a lot of manifestation books and models out there, like how many people know about The Secret, the book and the movie, about manifesting your ideal life and so forth. And I found that while it was a step in the direction of understanding that we can manifest many things in our life and our future, that we're not victims, I didn't feel that a lot of these models went far enough. I thought that there were some things missing in the manifestation process. I found in my practice that many people would do all of the positive thinking, say the affirmations. They would hit a wall and get stuck. You know, maybe they had a successful relationship, but their work was a mess, or they had a good work situation, but their finances were not so good, or their health was an issue. So it was like they would hit a wall, and it was like, why is this? You know, I'm doing all the affirmations and positive thinking and, you know, visualization and all of that. But I felt that there were a couple of things missing that needed to be added. And one of them is, what part of the mind is doing the manifesting? Is it the ego or is it the soul? The ego can manifest all kinds of material things, but not necessarily happiness and peace of mind. It's looking for an external solution for an internal problem. So you want to really be coming from a place of wholeness, connection with the divine, that state of well-being that comes from an inner abundance, rather than seeking externally to fill up an emptiness. So it's very important to have the soul in charge of the manifestation process. The second thing that I felt was missing from a lot of these models is 95% of the mind is unconscious. So we have a repository of unconscious memory, cellular memory. We have limiting beliefs from past lives and this life. We have traumas, patterns that we have carried into our life that sabotage us unconsciously. You know, some of those limiting beliefs are, no matter what you do, it's not good enough. Life is a struggle. You're guilty. You're sinful. Think of some others. What are some other limiting beliefs that we carry?
No pain, no gain.
Yeah. No pain, no gain. That's a good one. So, how do we heal the unconscious mind? How do we connect with our soul? How do we align our personality with our soul in this process? Well, the good news is that we have a lot of new methods for clearing unconscious blocks that help us to reprogram some of these barriers. So I developed a 7-step method for connecting more deeply with your soul's vision and for clearing what is in that unconscious mind. It's like the virus in the software of the subconscious. You know, just saying affirmations alone is like putting deodorant on a garbage pile. It works for a while, but eventually, you know, the smell comes to the surface. So we need to not be afraid to look at our shadow, you know, the parts of ourselves that we have split off and denied and swept under the rug that we don't like to look at, you know, the shameful parts. So when we look with compassion at that unfinished business and the disowned parts, it allows us to be able to reprogram it and heal it. But if it's out of sight, out of mind, swept under the rug, you don't have an opportunity to shift out of that. So we have new methods like energy psychology. How many people are familiar with some of the energy psychology techniques, the meridian therapies, which is like acupuncture for the emotions without the needles? Like, how many people know about EFT, the emotional freedom technique, the tapping technique, which is very effective also in clearing blockages. There is another method that I use, which I write about in the book, that's a little bit simpler than the EFT process that I use because people remember it. Not everybody remembers the tapping points. And it's called the WE method, Whole Health Effortlessly, Easily. It was developed by Dr. Dan Benor, who is a psychiatrist. And it's like a hybrid of EMDR. Some of you have heard about EMDR. It's with bilateral brain stimulation, so a combination of that with the EFT process. So what it does is shift from the amygdala primitive part of the brain, which is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain, into the higher cortical centers of the brain to have a whole brain response. So it restores you back to peace. So that is a method that I teach a lot of my clients in my workshops and in my book. Very, very handy tool. Also, past life regression is another process that is very useful, so that when people have tried a lot of other things and they feel stuck, sometimes the root of the issue is in a past life. So sometimes it's helpful to do the regression process. And I will give you an example in my own life of where this has been very, very helpful, this process, soul visioning process. My soul gave me an assignment in this lifetime to write a book. That is the last thing in the world I ever wanted to do. I was in my little office and I was doing psychotherapy with clients and very happy with what I was doing. But it's like the hounds of heaven. It's like when your soul contract comes up, it's like this sense of a mission that you need to do. But there was that part of me that says, no way, Jose, am I ever going to do this? So I had to get to the root of what was holding me back. Because it was terror. It wasn't just a little resistance. It was abject terror. Because when you write a book, you've got to be public. You've got to be visible, have a platform. You've got to be out there. Well, my subconscious mind said, that is not safe. That is dangerous. You are not going to do this. Totally irrational. It's like, where is this coming from? So I knew I had to get to the root of it. Well, some of it was childhood programming, like a lot of writers have. Who are you to write? You know, who's going to read it? Worthiness issues. But it was much deeper than that. So I had somebody do a past life regression on me. And I said, go to the root of this fear of moving forward and fulfilling my soul's contract. Well, it took me to a past lifetime. And I was a nun, and it was during the Inquisition, and they accused me of being a heretic. And they said, if you go into silence, we'll spare your life. Well, I was young and naive, and I stood up and I said, the truth cannot be silenced. Yes, it can. Burn me at the stake. Well, that imprinted a tremendous fear of speaking out, speaking about these subjects. So, in the wisdom of my soul, it gave me the assignment of writing because it forces me to address those blockages. So when I did the regression, I was able to forgive the Catholic Church for killing me, forgive myself for playing the martyr role. You know, I thought it was very honorable to be the suffering servant, very Catholic. And to release some of that trauma. Now, a lot of people are carrying this kind of pattern. Many healers, intuitives, spiritual teachers, you know, have blockages and resistances from past lifetimes, from persecution. So it is an extremely important thing to, I think, add to your process of clearing. You know, we carry over a lot of fears from other lifetimes. Like some of them are fear of failure, fear of abandonment, fear of self-expression, fear of authority, fear of death. Can you think of any other fears that we carry over? What? Commitment. Yes, absolutely. Right, getting close in relationships. So I think it's helpful to look at your patterns, to look at, I call them Groundhog Day phenomena, where you keep repeating the same patterns over and over again and try to get to the root of it. Now, sometimes it's from this life, from childhood patterns, you know, from trauma and programming, from culture, from ancestors. So it's unloading the trunk of junk so that we can align our personality with our soul and allow our soul to fully express through us and fulfill our life purpose. So the more you clear the beliefs, the more you're going to be in touch with your authentic self, your intuition, your higher self. And then blockages start falling away, synchronicities start happening. It's like you're in the right place at the right time with the right people. So that's what happened to me. It started opening up. Doors started opening. It was like I had a publisher come to me and say, make us the first publisher you contact. We're interested in your book. How often does that happen? Oh my goodness. And it was like that. It was just one door after another started opening up. Also, cleared out some of my relationship issues and blockages, and that opened the door to be with my soulmate. Let go of the unworthiness issue that I do deserve to be happy and do deserve a good relationship. So I encourage you to take a look at, your own blockages, your own patterns. Where are you holding yourself back? So part of the soul visioning process is identifying your soul ideals that you want to guide your life. Part of it is answering the question, if I could wake up tomorrow and have my life be just the way I want it, in my work, my relationships, my health, my finances, my spirituality, what would I be doing and feeling under the guidance of my soul? So I encourage people to start writing that down. Get quiet, tune in. And some people, their relationships are going well. That's not their issue. That's not their blockages. Some people, it's the finances. They're held back in finances. Some people, it's in their work or fulfilling their life purpose or feeling disconnected with the divine. So I encourage you to really do a self-assessment of where do you feel you're not fulfilling your highest potentials? Where are you holding yourself back, either consciously or unconsciously? And start working in reprogramming and reprocessing this. So I want you to take just a minute or two to think about that. What area of your life do you want to move forward and fulfill your highest potentials? Maybe think of one or two areas where you feel like you just are not as fulfilled as you need to be. Just take a moment to think about that. And what would that look and feel like if you stepped into your ideal future under the guidance of your soul and you were fulfilling those highest potentials in that ideal future? What would that look and feel like? Now, I do a guided process. We don't have time to do this today, a soul-guided journey into your future under the guidance of your soul to immerse yourself in that high vibration energy, that high consciousness energy, because that opens up the channels. That expands your sense of connection to the divine, and you step out of limitation. So that is a very, very powerful process. And then when you're in that altered state, I ask the question, any part of you holding back or saying no to any part of this process? And that's when a lot of these resistances start to come up. Yeah, right, that'll never happen, right? All those things, those blockages, like life is a struggle, happiness doesn't last, whatever it is. So I would encourage you to think about where are your limiting beliefs. Now, in my book, I have a list of universal limiting beliefs that many people carry. So that can be a guideline for you also. But a lot of this can come from your own subconscious mind by looking at your patterns in your life. What are the repeating patterns where you get stuck and keep making the same kinds of mistakes? So then once you get some of that identified, then you can do some of these other processes to clear it, like the meridian therapies, the energy psychology, the hypnotherapy, the past life regression process. So it's It's another way of looking at manifestation more from a soul level, because what is it that we really want, right? It's not so much the external things, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's really to connect with our wholeness, with our divinity, with our higher self, our authentic self. And then that flows through us into our world. It's guided from that inner state of well-being, rather than seeking for it externally. So I would encourage you to perhaps try this process, begin that journey of self-exploration. And Dave is actually going to talk about how to connect and align your personality with your soul. Dave?
Thank you. I think rather than using the podium, I'm going to amble around out here with a PowerPoint. And I hope you'll see my engineering training come through here. So, everyone wants to know what's your spiritual destiny? Well, here's the answer. I have it for you. I've got it up. There's 4 bullet points there on a PowerPoint. Pretty straightforward. You're created out of God's desire for spiritual expression and companionship. I want you to think about that for a moment. Companionship with God? You're a co-creator. So when you're working at the soul level, you're co-creating out of your own divinity. So another thing that's really essential is the idea of freedom, free will, free choice. This is so foundational. And it's what allows you to be a part of something, this greater whole. You have a freedom within it, though, for expression and co-creation. Because how could you be a real companion if you didn't have any choice about it? We have a choice. You don't have to be a companion if you don't want to be. But you're invited. It's an invitation. Another thing that's important is we are such a, what shall I say in America, materialistic culture? You know, we are. It's just, we have inspiration deficit disorder. You know, it's, people say it's attention deficit disorder, but it's really inspiration deficit disorder. We live very hyperkinetic lives. People are really busy running around, do. And you are the exception, you people who actually read and meditate and come to things like this. That's not a bad thing. I'm all for that. But what we have is a physical vehicle, not to de-emphasize the importance of it, but you know, it lasts maybe 100 years, maybe a little longer. But our soul and spirit are really eternal. And that soul is an individuality that can grow towards a greater awareness of its oneness or separateness from that whole. And you know, that's the whole idea of the great heresy in esoteric wisdom is the idea of separation. Because nobody's really separate. They can believe it, they can you know, hold on to that illusion, but it's not true. And you know, you don't even have to be much of a scientist to realize we're all breathing the same air here, and just to be gross, there's a lot of dead sin cells floating around in this room that belong to all of us. We're all connected, and we always have been. That's at a physical level. But at a spiritual level, it's actually much deeper. There are no private thoughts. I hate to tell people this because it's so shocking to them. They're like, wait a minute, I don't have any private thoughts. Well, I'll tell you a little secret. Everyone is always unconsciously reading everyone else all the time. It's only that you block that out of your conscious awareness that you're not aware of it. But people sense your energy, they sense your intention, they sense your purpose, they sense how you feel about them, even if you don't consciously say a word. Even if you unconsciously are thinking negative thoughts about them and you aren't even aware of your unconscious negative feelings, they're still picking up that energy. That's happening. So what's really important to fulfill our spiritual destiny, you've got to get a current sense of yourself. And you have to explore the current sense of yourself. We're going to talk about 2 of these that are very important. We all know we have a physical vehicle. Most of us believe we have emotions, except engineers, we don't have any. Well, maybe a few. That's why I had to marry a psychotherapist. It's very helpful. We know we have a mind, or at least we like to think we do when we haven't lost it. And But beyond that, there's this gestalt that we call the personality. It's not just the body, it's not just the emotions, it's not just the mind. It's this larger sense of identity that emerges from these various dimensions that we call our personality. And that's how most of us function, and we'll talk quite a bit about that tonight. But what about the soul? And I'll just tell a quick little story here. So I'm giving you these various dimensions of identity. Think of a carriage, and then there's a horse out in the pasture, and there's the driver of the carriage is at a bar relaxing, having a good time. The horse is wandering around, and the carriage is just sitting there. Now, if you think of the horse as your emotions, the carriage as your physical body, and the mind as the driver of the carriage, you know, he's at the bar. So if you're all disconnected, all these parts are going different directions. The horse is going this way, driver's going, your emotions are going one way, your mind's going another way, and your body's going a third direction. Guess what? You're not going to be very effective at creating or manifesting anything, right? Because you're not integrated. Those energies aren't coherent, they aren't cooperating or collaborating. But suppose the guy who's at the bar, your mind, the driver of the carriage, realizes, oh my God, I've got something to do. Better go round up the horse. So he goes out, he tracks down his emotions, hooks them up to the carriage, the physical body, jumps up there and says, let's go. But then, what's the point of a carriage? Why not just get on the horse and ride? You know, you could do that. You don't need a carriage, an empty carriage. What's the point of an empty carriage? Well, the thing is, who should be in the carriage is the soul. The soul is who should be telling the driver where to go. That's the part, and we lose sight of that in our culture so often. We're just, what do you think, what do you feel? That's what I ask people. But of course, if you're me, you ask people, what's your soul ray, and what's your current incarnational mission, and how does it relate to your last 5 past lives, and what have you got planned for your next few? You know, but I'm funny that way. But, you know, I like to have conversations like that. So, why do I have that perspective? Because I'm coming from the perspective of the soul, where life is continuous through multiple incarnations. People ask me, how do you know? It's like, how do you know you went to 3rd grade? Because you remember the teacher's name or the kids who sat next to you or whatever. That's how I know past lives. I remember, you know, being in the Crusades, coming back from the Crusades when it was hot and dusty and, you know, it was dry. And I was so happy to get back to England where it was green and there was water again, and sort of what a waste it was. Anyway, that's just one little memory I had. But the bodies that we have, whether that's the physical body, mental body, emotional body, are really vehicles for soul experience and soul expression. Now, this is not devaluing, because when you come into incarnation, this is a valuable opportunity for spiritual growth and service and learning. That's why we come here. So don't belittle this dimension. It's an important dimension. Some people are all hot, we're going to escape this dimension as soon as possible, and I'm never coming back. How many times have I heard that? A lot, actually. Get me the hell out of here, because this is hell, and I'm going to get to heaven. I'm never coming back here. The funny thing is, though, when you disincarnate and you get back out there, you start looking at things that you could have done differently, and you see the opportunities to help other people, and service opportunities, and development and growth and learning opportunities, and you realize, wow, there are things you can do in the earth plane that you can't do elsewhere. So you're going back. The other thing that's very important from the soul's point of view, the soul is all about purpose and intention and motive. It's why you do what you do that is credited to your soul record in terms of the memories that live in your karmic habitual memory bank. If you come from a noble purpose or a noble intention, that matters. And that matters even if your efforts are not successful. But you were actually doing things for the right reason and trying to be of help, trying to be a source of blessing and enlightenment. The other thing that's a little tricky about soul purpose, this is an instant quiz. People come to me and they say, can you tell me my soul purpose? And I can give you some input and suggestions, and you can go to Susan and do some experiential things and maybe get a deeper sense of it. But my experience is it tends to be an ongoing process of revelation. It's like pieces of a puzzle falling into place as you go through life. And you know, people look and they say, you weren't really leading groups 50 years ago. Well, actually I was. I started when I was, 14. But The thing is, I didn't know everything then and I don't know everything now. It's an ongoing process of revelation and learning about the soul. So, one thing that's important to think about is context. Susan mentioned past life regression. All of us here probably have a background in many previous lifetimes. Not all of them are equally significant to this incarnation, but some of them are tied more directly to this incarnation. This is very important. Your soul purpose is connected to a network of soul missions of people you reincarnated with now. In other words, there are people here who you've been with before. They're significant to you emotionally and spiritually, and you're learning things together, or maybe you're working on missions together. I'll just give you one little example. So, I was born, and a guy was born a block away from me. His mother and my mother had the same birth date. He was the valedictorian in our high school class, and he went off to MIT. They wouldn't let me in because I sent him my astrology chart and explained why, if you look at it, they really should let me in, but they refused. So I had to go to Northwestern. That was my second string school, and that's where I ended up. And actually, it really worked out well for me because that guy really had to struggle. He was like in the bottom half of his class, you know, at MIT, and I was still in the top 20%, so I was like happy. I made the right choice. But the important thing about this from a soul purpose point of view is this guy and I, we went to Cub Scouts together, Boy Scouts together, we walked to school together, we went to high school together. But one thing that was sort of strange about our relationship was we got along fine, but I didn't feel any strong emotional connection or rapport. I was like, what is this? Why don't I have that? I mean, I should either like him or not like him or something. I should some emotion. It's like, I mean, we're both like technical types, robots, but still, we have a little humanity in there. And so I asked a good friend of mine who was an intuitive, and they said, oh yeah, this is a very rare situation. It rarely happens. You rarely meet someone you haven't had a previous Earth incarnation with, but you guys have not been in the Earth together before. However, you've been in other dimensions of consciousness, so now you have to expand your world model. There are places besides here. You've been a lot together in other dimensions of consciousness. And this is like a handshake. You're getting introduced together in this Earth incarnation because you have some work to do in the future connecting science and spirituality together in a future Earth incarnation. And this lifetime, the 18 years you spent together before you went to college, that was just a handshake to get to know each other in Earth terms because you've got future incarnational work together in future incarnations. So I'm already, for people who are looking for me to be a spiritual success and not come back after this incarnation, sorry, I'm coming back. I got work to do. Anyway, just to expand your horizons and think about it from a bigger point of view. Your soul purposes comes from an intuitive awareness of patterns in your unconscious mind and in your superconscious mind. So what are the things that help us discover soul purpose? Cooperation and harmony with God, ourselves, and others. It doesn't sound so hard, does it? I have no problem cooperating with other people. Well, okay, sometimes I do. And what about with God? I get these intuitive flashes of guidance, and I go, I have a better idea. How many people have ever done that? Ignored their intuition, watch what happens. Oh, yeah, that didn't work out so well. And even cooperation with yourself. Remember that analogy we gave about the horse and the rider? How many people have ever had these internal conflicts? Your feelings are going one way, your brain is telling you, no, you better try something different. And, maybe sometimes if you're aware of it, the soul will give you a dream that gives you a whole new perspective. But this resolution, I tell you that people, the reason you dream at night is to deal with unresolved unconscious conflict. That's one of the big reasons. There can be other reasons, but that's one of the big reasons. Now, what you learn, this is why self-knowledge is really foundational. After oneness, this is probably the second step. Once you understand the nature of oneness, then you really have to start exploring self-knowledge. And we know ourselves sort of superficially at the personality level a lot of times. Like, you can take these personality inventories. You can say, oh yeah, Dave, I'm a detective type. I'm an explorer. I keep reading. I can't stop myself. It's obsessive compulsive disorder. You just keep learning. My good time on the weekends was go to the library for the weekend. Wow, that was cool. My parents were really worried about me. It's like something wrong with that boy. Another thing is discovering what are your core spiritual values and ideals. And an ideal is a standard for the quality of your motivation. Remember what I said about purpose? So if we have standards, which I'm not sure in the United States if we have standards anymore, but we used to. And believe me, our soul has standards. And, you know, we either live in accordance with those standards or we don't, and we notice it. Our lives are impacted by how congruent we are with our core spiritual values of our soul. Like, sometimes your soul is going to give you some feedback in a dream when your personality is really off track from which way you need to be going. And it can give you vocational guidance. I'll just give you one little simple example from a dream I had when I was working. This is really the only job I held for like a little over 6 years. I'm sort of unemployable, so I had to have my own company for the last 30-some years because I'm a failure as an employee. But I was actually, how I got the job that I got for 6 years is where the dream comes in. So I was in graduate school. I was not your typical stressed out graduate student because remember, I'm a knowledge junkie. So, you know, they let me do whatever I want. You want to take a course in philosophy and psychology, even though you're in industrial engineering, go for it. You know, political science, do that. Management, okay, whatever you want. But I was having a good time. But I had this dream and it troubled me a little bit. And in this dream, I was in, of all places, Hawaii. Talk about predicting the future. But little did I know Hawaii was going to be a lot of work. Anyway, in Hawaii, I was liking it there, but there was a plane leaving and it was going back to the mainland, and I was a little bit bothered by the fact that there were no movies on the plane. It's like, I'm not getting on a plane, a long flight back to the mainland if there are no movies. But there was a thing that bothered me more. All the people in Hawaii were asleep. They were all sleeping. And what I realized when I interpreted the dream is these people in Hawaii were me that were asleep. My potentials were asleep in graduate school because I was just a dilettante having fun. And I needed to leave for the mainland, which was the world of work, take a job, which I did, developed a lot of skills in that period of time, 6 years or so. And so the dream gave me some input about another perspective on, okay, graduate school is fun for you, but you really need to engage and, you know, get into the world of work. The other, and dreams are an example of the actual experiences and awareness of the unseen realms of the soul. But that's one of the most common ones. Of course, you can have these experiences in meditation, in guided reveries, in hypnotherapy. And Edgar Cayce made an interesting comment. He said, psychic is of the soul. So these psychic experiences often relate to the soul. Now, this is a fundamental thing I want to pay attention to. We really have two identities, and these are just different words in these columns for them. We say the soul and the personality. Personality is what we're really familiar with. It's like the mask we show the world. It's who we project. This is my image. You can see me. I'm an engineer. I'll give you my resume. You know, if I'm just giving you my personality resume, it's only going to have my education and work history. If I give you my soul resume, it's going to include my past lives, you know, most significant incarnations, what I learned. But anyway, we don't usually do that. Another way of thinking of it is your essence. What is most essential about you? Versus your chief trait, which people, when they talk about you, they say that Dave, you know, he's got a superiority complex. Yes, that's a trait. A know-it-all. He's a professional know-it-all. Okay, that's true, but it's only my personality. Hopefully you can forgive me for that. So there's individuality, your real individuality that persists beyond a single incarnation is related to the soul. You come back and you carry similar tendencies in the soul, at the soul level, but the personality you actually change from incarnation to incarnation. Believe it or not, I wasn't always such a science geek in past lives. I decided in this life I was going to take on a personality which really got me into the scientific stuff because that's all the vogue now in the 20th century, 21st century. And I figured, well, I got to fit in with the times and need to catch up, stop being an abstract philosophical type, etc. So that was a conscious choice at the soul level. Or some people say higher self and lower self, but this is not to devalue the lower self. It's just to recognize that there's a greater, more expansive sense of identity at the higher level and versus the lower level. The other thing is, your soul is very related to your destiny. A lot of your personality patterns are related to habitual memory and karma. And what is karma except cause and effect that carries over from one lifetime to the next lifetime? Or some people say giving way to habit. You know, you got a habit, you didn't break it in the last lifetime, you get another chance. Now here's some other things to contrast the soul and personality. The soul deals with the spiritual energy. The personality is more familiar with material energy. The soul is the source of your actual life form. When you die, your soul withdraws its life force from your physical body. That's what happens. You don't die unless your soul leaves. Your soul doesn't leave, you're alive. The personality is more identified with a form, whether that's your physical form or your emotional body or your mental body. The soul is known for being loving, having that quality of energy, whereas personalities are known for being intelligent and, dare I say at times, manipulative. But they get their way, you know. It's something, you got to survive. The real individuality is, as I said, the one that goes from incarnation to incarnation, relates to the soul, versus what people see and perceive in the personality is a little more of a mask. The soul is really focused on giving. Now, why should the soul be focused on giving? Because it already knows it's whole, complete, and perfect. What is there to get? It only wants to extend its being and express itself. That's what the soul does. It's coming from a place of abundance and giving. The personality, though, has a more limited focus of identity, and it thinks, oh my God, there's a million things I need. In fact, let me go on eBay and start shopping. I think I could buy them all in like about an hour. Getting. The soul doesn't look for a return, but believe me, the personality wants credit. And if you want to get subtle, there's, you can have an idealized image of a spiritual person, and then you want to get credit for all the spiritual stuff you did. That's really a personality imposter of the soul. But that's, you know, if you come Saturday, you'll hear more. Things like that. Whoops, I'm going to go back one. Oftentimes the heart, people talk about if you could only get into your heart. Well, that is the gateway to higher chakras, and that is when you're shifting from the lower trio to the upper trio of chakras. The heart is sort of a central station in the soul. Personality, when you talk about your power and your relative power in relationships or in the workplace, your social status, that relates a little more to the solar plexus, and that's where personality is at. More unitive consciousness at the soul level, you see it's more group conscious. A personality thinks, wait a minute, what about me? It's separative. A more expansive awareness. A couple nights ago I had a dream in which we were leaving Hawaii and we had this chance to go up in a hot air balloon before we left. We just went way, way up and looked down and there's the world way below. But then I realized, oh my God, we got to come down. And when we got back down, there were all these rental cars that looked alike. And I was like, how am I going to find my car? So it can be a little disorienting as you expand into the soul perspective, whereas the personality likes things a little more defined, limited, clear-cut, like what an engineer would like. And, okay, speed up a little here. So personalities tend to be sort of habitual. They run on automatic. Now, are all habits bad? No, there are good habits. There are things, you know, following certain basic habits like eating, sleeping. These are good habits to have. I mean, you know, within reason. But the soul tends to be more creative. And this is one of the hallmarks when you see soul purpose expressing. You'll feel creative impulses of energy flowing through you. I already talked about my panoramic balloon vision versus the soul stuck inside of a vehicle in traffic, has a little more myopic vision. And the soul tends to be more contemplative, whereas the personality is a little more action focused. You know, that Nike commercial, just do it and hope your shoe doesn't break. Can be more synergistic, where it sees the connections between things. One really fundamental thing is the soul cares about quality, not quantity. Quality, not appearance. That's my excuse for not, you know, being well dressed. I tell people I'm all about content and quality, and I have nothing to do with form. You know, probably there should be a balance, honestly, but. Okay, so we talked a little bit about personality dimensions, but just to give you a little bit more on it, we talked about the various bodies, the physical instincts and desires, the emotional impulses and karmic patterns. Susan talked a little bit about your fears, emotional inhibitions and habits, and your mental aspirations and ambitions. You should really, if you're going to study yourself and come to a sense of self-knowledge, you should go through this stuff and actually write out these things about yourself, and we'll see how self-aware you are. And, you know, discover. This is a journey in self-knowledge. And it's important to understand the personality. Why? Because you want to distinguish when it's motivating and working and when the soul is working through you, or when they're cooperating. Now, there are positive personality functions, because don't get me wrong, you come into the earth plane, you have to have a personality. It's like a necessary evil. Or not really evil, but it's a necessary functional vehicle. So, it's an instrument for soul expression. If you came here with no personality, your soul is not going to be able to work with you. It's got to have something to work with. It integrates the mental, astral, and etheric fields. That's important. Remember our little parable about the carriage and the horse and the driver? It directs your physical plane activities. Like, you know, you need to be on time to get somewhere, or you need to show up for a conference call or something like that. It establishes your visible personal identity as a source of self-reliance. You know, it's like, how do I know this person is different from that person? Well, I can tell they have different personalities. And this is maybe a little bit abstruse, but it's the primary resource for your preliminary vocation. Remember I said I chose a sort of scientific, technical type personality prior to incarnating? Well, I'm an engineer. You know, that's my preliminary vocation. That's what I do. That's what people mostly pay me for. But if you remember the other side, people always ask me when I was in engineering school, I was elected president of the Philosophy and Religion College at Northwestern University, and they said, why are you doing this? You're an engineer. And I said, before I was an engineer, I was remembering my past lives and dreams and doing spiritual study groups for 10 years. So that's why. I was a mystic first, and I became an engineer. It was a necessary part of this journey. And it relates to a larger soul purpose, too, of protecting the earth, which is part of a soul group that I'm part of, which came in and said, you know, you have to sort of take care of the earth. You can't destroy all the air and water and everything else. But that's a separate soul purpose. So, whoops, I'm going to go back one more. Oh. Sorry. So integrating the personality is important. Why? Because if we start reducing that internal conflict between the mind, the emotions, and the body, and we have a harmonized set of vehicles, they become an integrated personality, and then you can make more of an impact on the world because you're not wasting a lot of energy in internal conflict, and your soul can work with the personality more effectively. However, the integrated personality can be very attached to its sense of identity and say to the soul, hey, my life is working. I'm getting my way. I'm happy. You know, this is the personality talking to the soul. Don't bother me with these other soul impulses or missions or creative ideas you want. But it is important in this way because the integrated personality has freed itself from the cultural conditioning into the collective unconscious. And it can withstand the social pressures. This is a preliminary. It's like, think of a vessel that has to hold very high-powered spiritual energy. Now you have a strong enough vessel, and the vehicles are coordinated and attuned. It can hold soul energy and be a container for it. So when that infusion of soul energy comes in, it won't completely break you apart. Now, how many people here have ever heard of Kundalini? How many people have ever had a Kundalini experience? Wasn't that fun? Mine was. I mean, I've had interesting Kundalini experiences, but I know people who've had Kundalini experiences who didn't know what was happening to them, and they were doing all sorts, they wouldn't stop talking, they were doing involuntary yoga postures all night long. I mean, they could not contain the spiritual energy that was coming into them. They weren't ready. And they had excessively stimulated the Kundalini flow. So I'm serious when I tell you, you have to be ready for the spiritual energy that comes because it's powerful stuff. Now, what are some clues if you want to go prospecting to try to discover some of your hidden soul purpose? One thing you want to take a look at, and Susan alluded to this quite a bit in her segment, is let go of the unconscious fears that block your soul expression. Believe me, this is probably one of the most important things you can do because a lot of the soul wants to express love, and what is not love is fear, pretty much. So if you can figure out what those are and let go of them, your soul will come into expression much more nicely. You need to pay attention to the unconscious using dreams or meditation. You got to get over inspiration deficit disorder. You got to make time for it. And we're so busy, we don't make time. I tell people, if you're really serious about spiritual growth, don't talk about 15 minutes of meditation a day and I'm done. And the other 23 hours, forget about it. I mean, that's a good start, but you better be willing to put in some time if you really want to go deeply into this. Try new activities to explore your potentials. Now, this is what I always love. Find the gifts in your, hidden gifts in your faults. People say, I'm really struggling with this one trait or to transform. I've got to work with it. But it can be a clue to a gift that you have. And also understand, on the other side, how your familiar strengths can be obstacles. Like it's overusing a muscle. I'm really good at this, so I'm going to keep doing this and doing this. But then you don't become whole. You get muscle imbalance. You need to develop balance in the compensating side of things. What are some blocks to soul awareness? Well, I hate to tell you this, but our society is not great at avoiding childhood conditioning for conformity to social norms. That's what school is about. You go to school, and they're like, hey, turn in your papers on time, show up on time, do what authority tells you to do, and don't argue with me. And maybe there's some useful socialization there. Don't hit the other children and things like that. But honestly, there's a lot of conformity conditioning and a lack of creativity. Now, there are alternative schools like Waldorf and so on that have more creative curriculums, but many are basically train children away from their spiritual inclinations. Also, I hate to say this, especially it breaks my heart as an engineer, but technology makes us lazy in using our will. I just want to push a button. I want everything to happen. I don't want to have to actually make any effort myself. That can be a problem because you need to move your limbs to develop the will function. So that's why exercise is important. Jobs, nobody here fortunately probably has one of these, but some people have jobs that are mind-numbing routines. They don't engage their creative capacities. Well, what do you expect? You're not inviting it. You're not invoking your creativity. You're not trying to rely on your soul energy. It's not going to come if you're just going to rely on the personality level of energy. And if you're constantly busy with endless obligations, guess what? Who has time for the soul? You'll be squeezed out because you didn't allow it the space it needed to emerge. Some negative personality functions that can stand in the way of the soul it identifies with a limited response to your soul vision. You get this overwhelming soul vision, and your personality says, but, I can't do this, I'm afraid of that, maybe I could try a little bit. I can tell you the number of spiritual teachers that I've talked to who said, well, I had to wait 20 years to develop my confidence or get over my fear, and then I could finally do my spiritual mission. Very common. Habits can limit your growth, even though some habits are constructive, but if you can't get out of a habit, it can be destructive at times. And, you know, the personality just loves attention. I'm a Leo, so I know all about that. You know, can be ambitious and have its own agenda. What can be, when you have personality versus soul and you're trying to distinguish one influence from the other, the problem with a personality approach to manifestation or creativity is that it leads to an isolated sense of identity in which you say, I did it. My experience is, I want all the credit. Did I get what I wanted? Maybe you should give me the credit. This can be a problem. I'm not saying the personality will always do this, but it can do this, and it can get in the way of the soul. The soul will, this is an interesting little tidbit for you. This is courtesy of Rudolph Steiner. The will of the soul is your intuition. So you want to know the will of the soul, it's your intuition. You don't go wrong following that. Just like the thinking of the soul is your imagination. The feeling of the soul is your inspiration. But your real will is your intuition, and that's in harmony with the infinite. So what we want to do is allow that to express through the finite, through the personality, through the lower bodies, the mind, and the emotions. It's our soul that fulfilling its co-creative potential, that's the only thing that's going to make you have a sense of joy. Personality can be happy temporarily. I got what I wanted today, I'm happy. Guess what? That happiness with that goal never lasts. But at the soul level, if you're fulfilling your soul purpose, I promise you perennial joy. You will be filled with joy that you cannot imagine if you're living your soul purpose. And it lasts. Believe it or not, it's 8 o'clock. It's time for questions. How did I do that? I ended right at 8. I don't never do that.
If you have questions, please raise your hand and I will bring you the microphone.
How do you tap into your past experiences?
Past lives?
Yes.
There's actually a lot of different methods you can use. One is, I'll just give you some examples from my own experience. One is you can travel to other countries, and sometimes when you go to a locale where you've lived a previous life, you'll have deja vu, and it may bring back recall. Give you one example. I knew that I had had a lifetime in Scotland as an accountant. I want to say like the 1700s or thereabouts. So we went to Scotland in 1998, and I knew I was in Edinburgh. I knew I'd had this past life in Edinburgh. I'd grown up on a farm, but farming was really boring, so I gave up farming and went to be an accountant. I was an accountant in Scotland. And so we went there to where I'd been before. I knew I'd been there. And we were like, well, all over Edinburgh. Not a thing, not a single feeling, no deja vu, nothing. But on the bus going out of town, we must have drove by the farm where I grew up. Because I had a massive deja vu when I went by this bus. We were like 5-10 miles outside of Edinburgh. It's like, holy cow. I'm like remembering. So it can be like that. Reading historical fiction can bring back a memory. I remember reading a book, and this book was about the Essene community. And suddenly I flashed back to a past life in the Essene community. Even watching a movie. That I was telling you earlier about a Crusades memory, being in the Crusades. I got that memory was stimulated by watching a movie about Robin Hood, the Sean Connery version of Robin Hood. And I saw the scene in the movie, and suddenly I'm flashing back to that past life. So it can happen like that, or you can explore it more directly through a past life regression, which Susan specializes in, has been doing for many, many years.
Hypnosis.
Yeah, hypnotherapy. And that, I mean, your success rate is what, like 80, 90%? It's pretty easy for most people, if they can relax enough to go through a self-induced guided reverie and get into a past life. Dreams can show you past lifetimes. Even, believe it or not, smells can trigger it. There's a certain flower that grows in one place. I mean, I could tell you stories about, in fact, there's there's a book out called Return of the Revolutionaries by William Semke. I don't know if you've ever seen that book, but he's got a whole website where he did an interesting thing looking up famous people who are known historically who've reincarnated in the present day. And then he tracks all the similarities between what they were like then and what they're like now. And there's a lot of fascinating stories in there. And that's just one of several books that he's been involved in.
They even look the same.
Pardon?
They even have facial
you see,
features.
especially if it's a recent reincarnation, you'll see facial similarities. And there's photos from their old incarnation and this one, and you'll be like, oh my God, they look so much alike. Well, it's the same soul. There are some differences, and but there's strong similarities. Does that answer?
Yeah, it's just I've been having reoccurring nightmares, and in those nightmares, it's just I have paralysis,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to believe in soul traveling.
Yeah.
Where in my dreams I would have the power to do
Lucid dreaming, yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
As of late, there's been a lot of conflict, and I've been killed in my dreams. I've witnessed just all types, and it was to the point
Mm-hmm.
where I thought I was becoming post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Dreams are a really rich area to explore the unconscious. Susan works with it in her practice, and believe it or not, I have been doing dream groups since I was a teenager. And it's amazing the information you can get through dreams. And, I had a friend who's written several books on dreams. He said, bad dreams are really the best. Why? Because he said they're allowing you to look at things you need to look at, that you're finally willing to look at, that you may need to resolve unconscious conflicts or traumas or memories from the past. And your willingness to allow that to emerge is really a great therapeutic opportunity, because then you begin to work with it in ways to heal and change and shift. So that's a positive thing. Did you want to say anything about that?
Well, I think other clues about past lives are like time periods you're fascinated with, drawn to, or repelled by, medieval, Victorian, Civil War, colonial, World War II. Those kinds of fascinations are there for a reason. Countries that you're drawn to or repelled by, Like Dave, for example, you couldn't pay him to go to France because in one of his past lives, he was in prison during one of the revolutions and saw his compatriots guillotined outside of his window or hung. To this day, he cannot wear a necktie around his neck. I love France. I had a happy life there. So those kinds of attractions or repulsions are clues about possible past incarnations, or things you collect, things that fascinate you, that draw you, are also clues.
We have a question from online. If you are really stuck in a bad habit, such as alcoholism or overeating or whatever negative habit you want to stop, how do you start to give up the limited benefits and break out of the habit?
Yeah, I always look for traumas in childhood. How much of it is self-medicating, anesthetizing oneself. And sometimes when you clear some of those childhood memories that are painful, and then we use alcohol to numb that out, it can help to shift out of those patterns. But sometimes it carries over from past lives, There's maybe been, I call it Groundhog Day patterns, where you've had other lifetimes of addictions. And so it tends to keep representing itself if the lesson has not been mastered in other lives.
The other thing I would say about it is you don't really break a bad habit. You replace the habit that you don't like with a new habit. And you have to create a different response to the stimuli that is causing you to engage in whatever the bad habit or what you define as bad is. So you have to build a pattern to replace, you basically replace it with a new pattern of response. And you can do that through various methods of training the mind and training the awareness and meditation, working with dreams. All of those things can be helpful at forming new, more constructive, more creative habits. Let me just give you one sort of dramatic story about that. A friend of mine has written several books about visionary experiences and dreams. He was a social worker, and he dealt with abused women, women who frequently were endangered by their domestic partners. And this was difficult for him. And he started having dreams in which he was pursued by a guy with a knife. And he was scared out of his wits. And he would be running, and always being chased. And this dream was repetitive. And this was not a habit he was enjoying, like having someone chase him with a knife. But in the dream, he came to the realization, he became lucid, and he realized, wait a minute, this is about my willingness to defend the people who are being attacked and take care of them, which is part of my responsibility. So in the dream, he decided to turn around and resist and basically go toe-to-toe with the guy who's chasing him with a knife. And when he did that, that brought about a big healing in the way he was working with people, and he became more effective dealing with domestic violence victims. So it was an interesting, switch. And this was him dealing with some fears. So his bad habit was a fear of maybe not being as proactive as he needed to be in some situations. And I know that's a very specific example, but that's one.
Anyone else?
I was just going to mention, I had a client that grew up in an alcoholic family system where there was drugs and alcohol used. And she kept getting in relationships with alcoholic partners or addictive partners. And she never touched it. She was a very spiritual person. And she thought, why the heck have I attracted this into my life? Why am I surrounded by this? And what she found out was, in another life, she was the addict. She was the alcoholic. So she was coming into this lifetime to experience the other side of it, the impact that it had on the family. So to her credit, she was able to shift out of the addictive pattern and have compassion for her family members. So sometimes it works that way.
That's an important point, because one thing I want to say about karma that's often misunderstood, people think of karma and immediately they get this thing in their head that's punishment. No, karma is not punishment. It's law of cause and effect. It's about learning. When you learn what you're supposed to learn from your experience, then you don't have to do it anymore. You can stop once you've. The purpose of karma is the law of cause and effect, is to show you the impact of your choices and the consequences of your actions. Once you change, you don't need to do it anymore. So it can be healed. You move from the law of karma, which is, sort of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that sort of idea, which casts it in a punishment mode, and it isn't really like that. It's really cause and effect. And when there's no longer a cause because you've changed the cause in your consciousness, then there's no longer the effect either.
And I don't use the word karmic debt anymore because it has an implication of punishment, and I use it more as karmic lessons.
It's a much more accurate way to think about it.
So I'm in a,
Hold on.
I'm in a job/career that's unfulfilling, and I've had a pattern of unfulfilling careers, and so I'm stuck in a pattern, and want to, I guess, realize what area that I can go into, and yet make a living and do be in this, like a soul being in a human life. You have to make a living. So, and I can't figure out how to do that. So, what would your suggestion for that be?
Well, there's a number of things I would suggest. Is work with meditation, work with your dreams to get a sense of guidance about something that would be a more fulfilling option for you. And then you might start taking steps to explore that, whether that's through additional training, at the practical, quote-unquote, personality level, or if you go Susan's approach, you would look at the limiting patterns and beliefs that keep you thinking, I can't have a job or a vocation or a career that I really enjoy that's fulfilling. Is there something in my unconscious there that's leading me to create that situation, and address it that way as well. You could also look at some of these suggestions I had in the PowerPoint about really knowing yourself at a deep level and see talents, hidden gifts that you might have, and think about how to put those together in a creative way. But even more fundamental is really tuning into your intuition. Like I gave you that example about leaving graduate school to take a job. I really did that. There were other reasons, but I might have stayed in graduate school for another couple of years for all I know. I was having fun. But I had this dream in it, like, okay, I really have to, I was getting the intuitive message, you need to move on. You've had enough fun now for 3 years in graduate school, go ahead and take a job.
So what if you never find what if your soul, like, you don't find your calling, and then you die not falling?
There's this thing called future lifetimes.
You keep working on it.
Yeah.
That's why I love reincarnation. It's not a one-shot deal. We're an evolving soul. So we don't always have it all mastered in one lifetime.
She'll give you the mic.
You keep talking about reincarnation. Is this loosely based off Hinduism or Christianity? It seems kind of like a hodgepodge of a little of every religion. I am just kind of curious as to, do you believe in the higher being, or is it, does God manifest our destinies, our souls? I'm just kind of figuring out, like...
Well, let me ask, you're sort of asking multiple questions. Let me try and, do them one at a time a little bit. In terms of reincarnation, and I always find this fascinating, but if you actually go back and read History and Literature of Religions, which once upon a time I spent some time doing, you find out there was reincarnation in Christianity. It was there. It was there among Gnostics and other people. It was there the whole time. It's just that certain people didn't like it there, and they made a point of cutting it out and trying to edit it out of some of the religious texts. So even in Judaism, if you go into the more mystical Judaism, reincarnation is definitely understood. But there's the esoteric and the exoteric traditions in every religion. And if you go into the esoteric, you're going to run into the truth, which relates to reincarnation. The exoteric may not like it, may not have it as part of its belief system. You know, I always tell people, I used to have this sitting around in graduate school around the lunch table, we'd be talking about, you know, you realize if you don't believe in reincarnation, you're in the minority. Most people in the world do. You're the heretic in the Western culture if you think, you know, it's strictly a materialistic existence and there is no spiritual dimension. That's actually the outlier, statistically speaking. In terms of a supreme being or a divine being, yes, I definitely, you know, believe in that. But I always tell people I really don't believe in it, but I experience it. You know, because I'm an engineer, I'm a pragmatist. So I have to convince myself through my experience. You know, I have to get the double-blind, randomized, controlled study. But, you know, this is the funny thing. This relates to a separate topic, but psychic research. I remember a conversation I had in graduate school. I went up to the guy who I was taking a class with, who happened to be head of the American Psychological Association at the time. And I said, well, what do you make of all this research on psychic phenomena that Ryan and other people are doing? It passes all the statistical standards for scientific proof. There's thousands of studies now. And he said, I have to reject it because it upsets my sense of reality. And I said, but you're a scientist and it meets the scientific standard for proof. Here's the evidence, there's masses of it, and now, you know, 30-some years later, there's a lot more. Well, he said it upsets my idea of cause and effect. So what he was telling me is, I'm a scientist, but I have to reject data that makes me uncomfortable. It's like, what's with that? Maybe I didn't understand the science stuff right. Actually, one of my professors in graduate school said, you know the most important thing for getting your dissertation approved? I said, well, you know, well-researched, supported by evidence. You know, well, no, he said, toting to your advisor's prejudices. That's what really counts. Sorry. Go ahead. You had more.
No. I just find it fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
I just wonder what energy keeps everything bound then, you know, keeps you, if you keep coming back, you know, what holds you back from going beyond?
Well, the simplest thing is desire. We have a desire to come back because we feel we want to learn something. Maybe we come back to serve. Maybe we come back to work out something with somebody else. But, you know, people do graduate. I'll give you a apocryphal little story. About, I don't know, 1,200, 1,500 people had readings with Edgar Cayce. I think he told 18 of them, you don't need to reincarnate. This could be your last incarnation. And somebody wrote a little book about it called Reincarnation Unnecessary. Her name was Violet Shelley. And in this book, she was interested in comparing the patterns of these 18 people who were told, you don't have to come back if you don't want to. And what she found in their astrology chart and in the patterns of their past lives was very similar. What a shock. They were extremely loving, and incarnation after incarnation devoted of service to humanity. They were wise, they were tolerant, dedicated to humanity, serving humanity, and they'd been doing it for lifetimes. What a shock. Well, they'd done it enough that he said, not that you're perfect, but there's other realms and dimensions of learning that you can move on to and into and continue your growth and evolution and expansion. You don't have to come back unless you want to.
Yeah, I was thinking more of a cosmic, you know, with the being infinite.
Yeah, it's a big place out there. We get very parochial down here. We're on the Earth. We think, oh my God, it's so big and complicated here on the Earth plane. Yeah, no, not really. It's the world, the universe is way, way bigger, much more complex than we're aware of most of the time.
Okay.
So how does the astrology or astrological chart fit in?
Well, now you're going to have to come to my all-day lecture that I did up in Milwaukee a year ago. This is where, if you look at the Edgar Cayce readings, and you look at Egyptian mythology, and you look at Indian mythology, you'll see that their belief is that between incarnations, the soul goes to different dimensions of consciousness that are represented by the planets. Like the solar system is a soul school, and you go to different planets, between incarnations, not a physical being, but as a soul, to learn different lessons, to learn different qualities of consciousness that at a theoretical level you absorb into the being of your soul. But then you have to come back into Earth, which is like the laboratory, and you have to demonstrate the lived mastery of that quality of consciousness. So if you go to Venus because you need to work on love and beauty and grace and charm, and you absorb all those qualities into your consciousness as a soul, then you come back into Earth, maybe you're an artist or a romance writer or something else, but you express those qualities and demonstrate the lived mastery of those qualities. Then if you finish that incarnation, you're successful at demonstrating the expression of those qualities of soul that you've developed and expressed. Maybe you go to a different planet the next time, you go to Jupiter, and you learn about wisdom and tolerance and politics and philanthropy, and you develop those qualities, or you absorb those qualities. You come back into the Earth, and you do something different. But there's like a cycle of going the rounds where your soul is having experiences in other dimensions of consciousness, coming back into Earth to pass the laboratory section, show that it can really express those soul qualities at a masterful level and way. And if you don't, you can retake the test. You know, if you don't succeed fully at Venus, and you just came from Venus and you finished this incarnation, you need a little more Venus, you can go back to Venus and absorb some more of that. And if you really want to read more about this, I encourage you to look at Rudolph Steiner, Edgar Cayce, ancient Indian and Egyptian astrology. People think these ideas are strange and new. No, they're not. They've been around for thousands of years. Most people just never read about them.
And forgiveness is the fast track to awakening. If you want to speed up your progress in classroom Earth, practice forgiveness of yourself and others. I mean, we are in a dream state here. It's like, the analogy that I use is it's like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, you know, seeking and not finding and searching for home. And eventually she wakes up and realizes she never left home. So we're in the process of awakening to the reality of our true home. So here is where we're in various stages of learning and awareness of our true nature. So this classroom Earth gives us an opportunity to practice forgiveness that undoes the guilt of the belief in separation.
I think we'll end the formal part of the program now. Thank you so much, David and Susan.
Oh.
We have books available for purchase, and please consider joining Susan on Saturday for the workshop.
Dave.
And Dave.
Uh-huh.
They'll both be there. Go into more depth. This was a nice introduction and overview, but you can really get into some interesting things this weekend.
And the book does have guided journeys in it, and free MP3 downloads that take you into that ideal future. So if you want to learn more about some of these methods that I talked about identifying your limiting core beliefs and undoing them, the book takes you through that process. But the workshop itself is going to go into much more depth. I'll be taking you actually on these experiential journeys into your ideal future, helping you identify specifically your limiting beliefs and teaching you some of those techniques for undoing it, as well as doing a group past life regression, because it's helpful to identify what you've carried into this lifetime, patterns that are still affecting you. So we'll be doing that on Saturday also.
Also, I just want to mention that this was going around. It's just a mailing list for future events we may be doing. If anyone's interested, like to sign it, that has it, they're welcome to. I'll just leave it here.
And also coming up, Pablo Sender will be here in March. He's an international speaker and will lead a day-long meditation retreat exploring the 4 states of consciousness. That's on Saturday, March 9th. He will speak on the Thursday before that. And next Thursday, Juliana Sassano, she's our bookstore manager and teaches meditative yoga here on Tuesdays. She will be speaking about life after death, how daily living shapes the after-death experience. So join us for any or all of those programs. And thanks to all of you for spending a part of your evening with us. I hope you found this program rewarding, informative, enlightening. And please stay for some refreshments and continued conversation. And
I'll be signing books.
purchasing a book. Thank you.